Welcome to China Truths. Today we will bring you the following stories. Future EU trade chief pledges tough action on China. China-backed cyber attack among most significant in US history. Top Republican lawmaker urges Commerce Department to close loopholes used by Huawei, SMIC. Now, let's dive into the details. It's all covered in today's China Truths. Future EU trade chief pledges tough action on China. The trade chief designate of the European Union pledged tough action on China's overcapacity exports. At a parliamentary confirmation hearing on November 4, Maroš Šefčovič, the Slovakia-born European Commissioner designate for trade, called China the EU's most challenging trading partner. EU is not interested in trade wars, Šefčovič said, pointing out that China's problems include overcapacity, subsidies, and an unequal playing field. We are looking for rebalancing our relationship with China in areas where we feel our relationship is not fair. We will tackle with all our force overcapacities being created by China and threatening our industry in Europe. On October 4, the EU decided to impose hefty duties on electric vehicles made in China, the highest profile trade measure against the country in more than a decade. The investigation found that the battery electric vehicles, BEVs, value chain in China receives unfair subsidization, which poses an economic threat to EU BEV producers, according to an October 29 statement from the European Commission. Under the new duties, which went into effect on November 1, sampled Chinese exporting producers SAIC, Geely, and BYD are subject to countervailing duties of 17%, 18.8%, and 35.3%, respectively. Other cooperating companies are subject to a duty of 20.7%. Tesla was assigned a duty of 7.8% after a validated request for a personal evaluation. Companies that are not cooperating will face a 35.3% duty. The decision aligns the EU with those of the United States and Canada, as U.S. President Joe Biden in May imposed a 100% tariff on EVs shipped from China, quadrupling the previous 25% tariffs, while Canada also adopted a similar measure. In response to the EU's move, China denied the accusations and called the tariffs trade protectionism. Raising tariffs will only shake and hinder the confidence and determination of Chinese companies in investment and cooperation in Europe, China's Ministry of Commerce said. China will take all measures to firmly protect the interests of Chinese enterprises. It has filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization against the EU's tariff increase on electric vehicles. The Commission negotiators are continuing discussions with their Chinese counterparts regarding minimum price commitments for imported cars. What is very important for us is that even if you go for price undertakings, they have to be equally effective and enforceable as the import duties we introduced. So that's absolutely key for us, said Šefčovič, who will also serve as the Commissioner for Economic Security, pending approval and a vote by members of the European Parliament later this month. Šefčovič has been a commissioner with various portfolios since 2009 and is among 26 commissioners in the European Commission serving under Executive Chief Ursula von der Leyen. He is currently participating in hearings at the European Parliament this week and the following week. The next commission will start work after gaining parliamentary approval. China-backed cyber attack among most significant in U.S. history. A cyber attack perpetrated by Chinese state-backed actors and revealed in October was one of the largest and most significant in U.S. history, according to the top Senate intelligence leader. Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, who chairs the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, said that the hack conducted by the Salt Typhoon threat group was unprecedented in its size and scope. I think it will go down as maybe one of the most significant cyber attacks we've faced in our country, Warner said on November 4. Salt Typhoon's cyber attack is believed to have compromised numerous major telecommunications networks, including those of AT&T, CenturyLink, and Verizon. The attack targeted companies and individuals, including former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, a Republican from Ohio, said during an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast on October 31 that his phone was compromised by the attack. Vance added that most of his messages were encrypted using third-party apps such as Signal, and he did not believe the hackers were able to obtain his personal communications. Though China, Iran, and Russia have all engaged in malicious cyber activity against the United States in order to interfere in the 2024 presidential election, Warner said that the Salt Typhoon attack did not have election interference as its goal. Instead, the attack was long ongoing and appeared to be conducted for espionage purposes, raising questions about the risk posed by the United States' lax cybersecurity standards for telecommunications infrastructure. It has been, unfortunately, going on for some time, Warner said. I believe it begs the fact that we do not have any minimum cybersecurity within our telecom section. Mentioning his telecom business background, Warner added that those minimum cyber standards in telecom will be a top legislative agenda following the breach. The apparent scope and severity of the Salt Typhoon attack raises questions about the security of the telecommunications infrastructure used by most Americans every day and how a foreign power could come to infiltrate it. Some reports have suggested that Salt Typhoon gained access to the systems by infiltrating the infrastructure, which allows court-authorized wiretapping of U.S. citizens by law enforcement and intelligence agencies, according to an October report by the Congressional Research Service. In line with this, Vance said that the China-based hackers responsible for compromising his phone used back-end infrastructure originally created to accommodate the Patriot Act and FISA Section 702. We could not independently verify those allegations. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the FBI declined to comment on the matter. The breach is just one part of China's sweeping effort to infiltrate and destabilize U.S. systems and is evidence that the United States is failing to defend its systems from foreign interference. The Typhoon moniker was created by Microsoft and subsequently adopted by the U.S. government. It is also used to refer to Chinese state-sponsored threat actors. Salt Typhoon is just one such entity that has found success in recent months. Others include Volt Typhoon and Flax Typhoon, both of which target U.S. and allied critical infrastructure for the purpose of preparing sabotage in the event of a major armed conflict between the United States and China. FBI Director Christopher Wray has previously testified that the United States is particularly vulnerable to such attacks because of its reliance on the relatively unregulated internet systems of the private sector and the fact that Chinese hackers outnumber FBI cybersecurity personnel 50 to 1. Salt Typhoon, meanwhile, appears to have targeted U.S. telecommunications infrastructure en masse with the goal of exfiltrating data for espionage purposes. John Cohen, executive director at the Center for Internet Security think tank, said that threat actors such as Salt Typhoon will use their ill-gotten access to information and communication systems to steal sensitive information for use in future malign information operations. These attackers are looking for sensitive data that they can use to embarrass or undermine the credibility of the target, or to create a veil of legitimacy for conspiracy theories or other manufactured content so that it appears more believable, Cohen said. Cohen added that China's ultimate goal in targeting the government, academia, and private sector entities was to secure economic and geopolitical superiority over the United States. To that end, he noted that China's cyber attacks did not appear to target one political party or the other but were instead intended to undermine confidence in the current U.S. government and its policies in order to replace officials and policies with those more favorable to its geopolitical interests. Though they use similar playbooks to guide their malign information operations, the objectives of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea can differ, Cohen said. Likewise, Warner said that China focused on undermining anyone with strong records against China, whereas Russia and Iran were actively seeking to influence the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. At the end of the day, the biggest concern they all have is to undermine our trust in our democracy, Warner said. Top Republican lawmaker urges Commerce Department to close loopholes used by Huawei, SMIC. Representative Michael McCaul, a Republican from Texas, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, on November 4 urged the Commerce Department to enforce existing export controls meant to prevent key Chinese government-tied companies such as Huawei and Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, SMIC, from obtaining advanced technologies for national security reasons. He warned that the U.S. government has assumed that Chinese companies would abide by the export control laws rather than find workarounds, and evidence suggests this has allowed companies tied to the Chinese military to leapfrog the United States in areas of technological advancement. There is a growing bipartisan frustration that BIS refuses to act on fact-based reports that detail Huawei's efforts to evade and undermine U.S. export controls, McCaul wrote to the Department of Commerce's Undersecretary Alan Estevez responsible for Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS. The November 4 letter follows recent inquiries from Representative John Molinar, a Republican from Michigan, and Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat from Illinois, chair and ranking member of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, respectively, and Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia, over new revelations that Huawei obtained a chip produced by Taiwanese chip maker TSMC. Huawei was first sanctioned in 2019, with the Chinese tech company and 68 of its affiliates added to the Commerce Department's Entity List, or Trade Restriction List, for national security reasons. SMIC was added in 2020, along with 10 affiliates. The Pentagon has also blacklisted both companies for ties to the Chinese military. However, both Huawei and SMIC have complex licensing policies, with items being reviewed on a case-by-case basis, according to a BIS report published in July. This is not the first time McCaul has urged the Commerce Department to take stricter vigilance when it comes to preventing these blacklisted companies from obtaining advanced technologies. In 2023, he led a group of Republican lawmakers in sending a similar inquiry to BIS, resulting in the response report that BIS published earlier this year. In the November 4 letter, McCall points out that the recent Huawei incident is not an outlier and that Chinese companies have taken advantage of loopholes to obtain technologies that should have been blocked to them. He requested that the export controls be expanded upon. The rules created in 2020 were limited, such as banning SMIC from obtaining tools uniquely capable of producing 10-nanometer and below chips, McCall wrote. As a result, over a 6-month timeframe, BIS approved $40 billion worth of exports to SMIC and denied fewer than 1% of licenses, according to data released by the House Foreign Affairs Committee in October 2021. As it stands, the current rules limit BIS from denying licenses to companies that, in turn, supply to SMIC, McCall said, while also assuming that SMIC is properly abiding by U.S. export control laws. The current SMIC licensing policy ignores PRC laws that give its government explicit authority to compel the transfer of any item, regardless of whether such a transfer violates U.S. law, he wrote. Foreign persons could be compelled by PRC law to violate U.S. export controls by transferring items to SMIC South. U.S. companies and BIS have essentially no means to verify and stop an illicit transfer because of the PRC's de facto and de jure restrictions on due diligence. Lawmakers have increasingly expressed concerns that Chinese military-tied companies such as Huawei and SMIC are skirting U.S. export control laws. Notably, Huawei launched a new phone last year that uses 7-nanometer technology manufactured by SMIC despite sanctions, which experts and lawmakers said could not have happened unless the Chinese state-backed companies had gotten around export controls. McCall said in the new letter that analysts predict SMIC may soon produce more than 1 million advanced graphic processing units for Huawei and that this production capacity undermines current export controls. SMIC South's breakthroughs are a smoking gun that a violation of U.S. export control laws is occurring, he wrote. If BIS had denied SMIC access to advanced technologies, it would have lacked access to the U.S. tools, parts, and components needed to fabricate chips, he said. McCall hypothesized that the Chinese companies had stockpiled enough technology to help China leapfrog the United States in the development of artificial general intelligence. It appears that BIS likely approved enough licenses to help SMIC stockpile all the items it needs, and the paper promises of export licenses that underlie BIS's entire PRC licensing policy are being systemically violated, he wrote. McCall urged BIS to inspect SMIC facilities in China to verify in person that licenses are not being violated. If the PRC is unwilling to immediately agree to a comprehensive audit of all SMIC facilities in its books, BIS should pause all existing licenses for SMIC, the letter reads.